So thank you very much, Scott. As our panelists all file in, I'll tap dance for a minute. Last year, I hosted a panel on robotics, and throughout the year, many people said, nice topic, Dave, but I think we get it now. What's next? And I see probably as an advisor 800 to 1,000 different companies each year, and a lot of people were asking, where's surgery going from a digital and intelligent perspective? They wanted to hear from our industry leadership on that. So I have to thank my esteemed panelists all for joining me on this. I'm very proud and pleased to have some of our best in the industry that have a very unique and diverse perspective on this. Just as a setup to this conversation, this could be an all-day or an all-week topic to dive into. For the purposes of this panel, I'd like to define digital as the digitization of people, processes, product, procedures. And when we are going to talk about surgery, I don't want to think of just open or laparoscopic surgery, but I'm looking to discuss everything from any procedure that would be done endoluminal, endovascular, percutaneous. We're talking about interventions here. So with that, I'm going to turn it right down the line to each of the panelists to introduce themselves, their companies, and their roles.
All right, Rachel Van Stratton. I'm part of J&J's Robotic and Digital Solutions Group, specific into our business for global strategic marketing, but I'm focused on advanced imaging, end-to-end spectrum, kind of pre-op all the way through post-op.
Thanks. Tal Wenderow. I'm a venture partner of Genesis Medtech, which is an upcoming strategic player, doing both devices and looking also in digital surgery, and we'll define it better, hopefully, than what Dave did. Before that, I was in robotics, co-founder of Corindus Vascular Robotics.
I'm Daniel Hawkins, founder and CEO of Avail Medsystems. As I mentioned in 2 panels ago, I've been in this space 30 years. Actually, the earliest stages of robotics as part of Intuitive Surgical back in the very, very early days. What I'm doing right now with Avail Medsystems is we've deployed a network of access points into procedure rooms that allow remote access into those procedure rooms, but it also provides an ecosystem to connect, I'll describe them as digital capabilities, into procedures that are not currently robotic. And I think that's really the relevancy of what we're doing in this particular panel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Oliver Keown. I'm Managing Director of Intuitive Ventures, the venture arm of Intuitive Surgical, which pioneered the field of surgical robotics the last 25 or so years. My role is really focused on ecosystem, investing in early-stage transformative companies that are pushing the field of minimally invasive care forward across digital, device, therapeutics. We spend a lot of time being thoughtful about the opportunities in digital, working with our stakeholders, our colleagues internally to understand where Intuitive is today, where it's going, and trying to translate that into opportunities to identify, to support, to accelerate companies in the broader ecosystems that we can support and advance.
And hi, I'm Chris Cleary. I run corporate development for Medtronic. And I've looked at a lot of investments and acquisitions in the digital surgery and technology space. We bought one a couple of years ago, digital surgery out of London. And, I'm an avid follower of, the technology and its applicability for our surgical franchise.
Thanks, Chris. Let's start with you since you're at the end of the line, and we'll work backwards. We'll shift it up a little bit, but I want to start at the end of the discussion and then work backwards as well, meaning let's talk the overall objective of what you're expecting out of digital surgery. Where are we trying to go with this for the ultimate goal?
Yeah, look, for us, we kind of look at it and say there ought to be, logical guardrails for what the surgeon ought to expect to see in their camera or their line of sight, and what they actually see. And you can inform surgical procedures in terms of timing, turnaround time, the procedural steps. One of the really cool things we found out from doing diligence on digital surgery was that the majority of surgeons for like a hernia operation thought there were like 5 steps. But when you got down to the actual steps that are kind of loaded into the procedure process, there's like, 43. And, people aren't aware of how they kind of glide between different steps, and there's very different approaches. People, absolutely take a different path to the same surgical target a lot of the time. And, seeing what it ought to be and working that into your planning, working that into some kind of a system where, potentially you can deactivate end effectors if they're in a no-fly zone, to increase safety. We think that those are very logical extensions of, a database that shows, thousands of procedures that the surgeon is doing as opposed to the one that they're doing that morning. So I think it's a major advancement in the potential for safety, for planning, for the integration of not just the procedure, but the imaging and, all of the aspects that are just fundamentally data. And, right now, surgery, my son is a neurosurgical resident. I think he's on a 15-year program or something like that. He's in year 6. But, it's an apprenticeship, and that's how he would describe it. And, I think having data to kind of augment your experiential apprenticeship is it's an important function of that. At the end of the day, a lot of our customers are physicians and surgeons, and, improving their ability to, do what they do more safely, hopefully a little bit more efficiently, that's a completely valid goal.
Oliver, do you see it the same way? And I'd invite anybody, if you have a different viewpoint, even of the definition of digital surgery, please offer.
Yeah, I'd expand upon it. I think that's all exactly right. It's about unlocking insights and actionability through data. It's really about the integration of hardware, of data, of analytics across that surgical journey. And the way I think about it and get to look both external and internal to Intuitive, there's the clinical view, there's all the hardware, the procedural elements, the medical devices, the computer vision and opportunity to really unlock value and outcomes through innovation there. And then it's the broader OR setting. There's an incredible amount of opportunity to unlock value as you look at the room, as you look at teams, you look at performance, you look at both from a surgeon perspective and a broader workflow around surgery. And then you look at the perioperative journey, how outcomes in care journeys can be improved upon, activated by data inputs that are coming maybe from that intraoperative view. And then ultimately, I think it's about tying that to the broader patient journey, maybe even going as far as diagnosis to recovery and cure. And I'm selling a grand vision there, but I do think digital surgery is that continuum. I think it's connecting the dots, and it's not going to be one player, it's going to be an ecosystem of players. And I think that's where I'm excited about finding companies and startups and the collaborations between med device companies, where it's going to be at the fringes of those ecosystems.
I couldn't agree more with how you position that, and I'm reminded of 1999 when I'm with Fred Mall in Mountain View, California, and we're talking about the opportunity for what is now robotic surgery. We actually ran from that word because it was scary at the time, if you can imagine that, but we talked about a future where we could record procedures. We talked about a future where libraries could get created, where you could deploy artificial intelligence, where you could learn as the surgeon treating a patient incident on the table from the experience of the 5,000 that preceded you, not from the exactness of what they did, but from the overall understanding of how to use that body of information. Could you use artificial intelligence algorithms against live video recorded at that point asynchronously to provide you information instantly while you're treating a patient? That was a vision. And then we got back to our day job, right? Because at the time, computing power wasn't there. The capabilities weren't there. There was no way to gather that information. We were speaking of the vision, but not talking of the reality, if you will. Fast forward a handful of startups later, I left my last one, Shockwave Medical, in 2017, pre-pandemic, with a charge to create a network. And that network is actually putting eyes and ears in operating rooms. We're doing it for a whole slew of reasons, but one of the key reasons underneath all of that is we want to digitize every procedure, cath-based procedures, open procedures, orthopedic, neuro, robotic, and otherwise, with the basic notion that there's an ecosystem that can get created where you're acquiring optics inside of the operating room, intraprocedural imaging through scopes, through cath lab feeds, and the like. And if you've got a proprietary way with hardware and software to aggregate all of that and deliver that content back to industry who makes the devices in that field, in that world, in a consistent platform across procedures, that's now actionable, right? One of the challenges that I recognized back in 2017 is you can't really get, outside of robotics, the kind of information you need in every procedure possible because the cameras aren't there. The interface to imaging isn't there. The audio isn't there. So we created a system that allows that. I couldn't agree more with your vision that if you gather those bits of information live during a procedure, you have learning opportunities from thousands of procedures preceding to benefit the patient who's incident on the table at that time.
Yeah, and I don't want to repeat because otherwise we'll say the same thing, but to me fundamentally is the way we treat patients is exactly what happened in that patient and delete all the previous memory. And the way physicians train are, like your son Chris, is the way that his physician or his hospitals are doing cases today. And we, people using democratize all of that. In the end of the day, we're not personalized for that patient on that day. So to me, digital surgery is smart devices, connected devices. It's things that coming pre-op, post-op. We're probably all saying the same things from different angles, but we're all speaking of, in the end of the day, with those KOL that are doing those 10,000 cases. The majority of physicians are not doing a lot of cases. So how do you help them see through? How do you help them identify new things that they don't see, or complex procedure that you can log in with your system to help them and mentor? There's so many opportunities, but in the end of the day, to me, is how you personalize and how do you follow on the procedure, on the post-treatment. Because most of us are all, as a medical device company, we think about the inter-procedure or post or pre, but we don't think about continuum of care because we don't have that platform. And the treating physician post is not the same one as the operating physician or the diagnostic physician. So to me, that digitalization of that process of throughout the entire ecosystem, more than the surgery, will benefit patient even post, because we all know what happened in the rehab. People don't take medication. You can take that to digital health and all of that. It's all connected in the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, as you start to look at the amount of data that's available and being able to utilize that to transform outcomes and reduce healthcare costs and give patients more hope and ability to recover faster. That starts to set things in motion from all of the things that the panelists have identified as ways to do that, but being able to really manage and help to improve outcomes.
So these are quite lofty objectives, and I think that's the only way we're going to make meaningful impact in our procedures and our outcomes. Is this the strategy of a 1,000-mile journey starts with the first step? In other words, do we have to start at some place with standardization, or do we even go earlier with training? Do we try to get to optimization? How do we start, Oliver, in this journey?
So I think everything you just described, and there's such a kind of glut of amazing companies that are putting it into action today, right? They're unlocking value through digital in the surgical setting, in the procedural settings. I think of Intuitive that's been digital for 25 plus years, as you say, capturing data at a systems level from sensors, using that and 10 million procedures worth of it to power a variety of analytics. And I think has an exciting roadmap and pipeline of innovation to happen. But I also get excited about how, from these unique assets, that's going to power potentially the ecosystems of the future too, across training, customizable training. Can we understand the surgeon's performance post-fact, but maybe even real time on where they are maybe falling short or where there's opportunities for improvement, and maybe intervene in a way that's, and then also on the training side, opportunities to use that data, again, that's being utilized today in the operational side of a healthcare system, to use real data from real systems, real procedures, to inform how to manage, how to optimize a robotic surgical practice, or otherwise. And they're intuitive examples, and as I said, there's so many startups that are using AR, VR on the training side, various technologies, to utilize some of these data sets. So I think there's just so much opportunity, and there's a lot of proof points in the market today that builds towards the grander visions I think we've all laid out.
There's an obvious reason why the panelists here have deep history and even current interaction as you bring robotics to the market. There's a computer interface between the user, the patient, and the devices. But we're looking at a very low penetration today of robotics across the entire definition of procedures that we earlier discussed. How do we capture all of this data in the rest of what we're doing from non-roboticized processes and procedures? And then not only how do we capture the data, I want to take a little bit of time talking about how we store that, how we depersonalize that, and then the really difficult one and how we share that. Rachel, you want to start us? Because I know Daniel will go on for a while.
Probably right.
I think to answer your question about other procedures, right, it's not just robotics out there. So how do you look at the ability to utilize devices? I think even people talk about whether or not it's open source. How do we share data across multiple companies? How do we make that happen? Because as you said, we're all competitors, but at the end of the day, we all are driving toward the same goal. So looking at all of our devices that we have today, trying to really understand how do we gather data from those that can also be applied in other aspects of surgery. Just the idea of obtaining that data. I was talking with someone yesterday, there's a balance, right? The governments are starting to put a lot of restrictions in place on how to get access to that data. Whether it's consent or does the surgeon have the rights to it. And that starts to become a hindrance from a digital perspective because you want these improved outcomes and you want to get there, but then when you go to implement this in a hospital, all of their IT folks are like, well, wait a minute, like, what are you connecting to? Like, because they can't afford the breaches, right? The breaches are bad. And bad for all of us. So that's where we have to strike the balance and really try to understand how do we manage it in the most compliant and cohesive manner with the tools that are available and storage available today and being able to share it widespread.
Tal, you shared with me some unique perspectives on that.
Yeah, I mean, the data is always challenging. I mean, first you can take all these cyber companies and just bring them to healthcare, and you see more and more coming, meaning the technology is out there. But Amazon know exactly what I'm going to order, and it's tomorrow on my front door. We don't care about it. So it's also, meaning I'm okay giving all my data and to the better care. So I think it's also a consumer side that the consumer, I think most of them don't care about their own data. It's more the hospital is protective because some lawyers sue them once in a while about the liability. It will take time, meaning it's just a transition. We obviously need to do our job to protect the data, anonymize the data, and do from our end, right, and gain the trust of the customers and the physicians. I've been advising some companies that are trying to monetize that and trying to create a data place. And their challenge is exactly that. The Mayo of the world and the MGH of the world, I don't want to share any data. I want it locally. I don't want it on the cloud.
Yep.
And the challenge of the hospital, they don't own the data, but they think they own the data, because the data is actually the patient. So the best solution is someone out there is go to the patient and get from there the data, but that's not simple, because how do you get there and how do you load that? I think it will take time. I still have CDs of MRI of my son in my house that I don't know what to do with that, but if someone wants to digitalize those, but it's time, it's progression, it's trust, it's all of the above.
Chris, you see a lot of facilities. You have probably one of the most diverse portfolios. Does the Mayo want to share with down the road here Scripps, or UCSF says we want to compete in Northern California and be the best and don't let anybody learn from our experience? Or are they saying let's rise all ships and improve?
Yeah. Look, they're all saying both, right? I mean, everyone's coming at this from a different direction. And I think if you're in the industry, you've got to play through and understand that at some point data rights and security are going to work themselves out, and people will have access to the data because it has so much value. In the intervening period, look, different personalities inside the same companies are going to have different viewpoints on this, and a lot of them are felt very strongly, and you got to play through usurious demands for being paid for their data rights and stuff like that. But, the reality is sometimes it'll be worth it, sometimes it won't. If you go back to the founding of the internet and kind of how choppy that was at the beginning, I think we're kind of at that phase for digital surgery, and we're all going to have to play through understanding that history is very likely to repeat itself, and we're all going to have access to this data down the road. So I think everybody here is probably behaving that way. We are. It's not easy. We're all fighting for proprietary access to the PACS system sometimes, and we're not all going to get it. There may be a real estate constraint in the market. There's only so much room for so many boxes that have universal access to all this data, and I think that's like a real, scarcity factor in the market that we all have to understand. I think there's a value to having a workable ecosystem early as opposed to late. But I do think at some point we're going to get through all the competing rights and security concerns.
Oliver, tell us about your attitude toward open source sharing of the data as well, and that you're going to capture so much, but you're still going to need many other inputs as well to make more meaningful use out of even your own instruments and technology data. Is this something that all the data you'll keep proprietary, or is it, again, going to be an open source and shared across the industry?
Well, I think, data's really only as valuable as the insights, right, it can unlock. And I think it's the connectivity across different data sets, different environments that's going to create value and the applications that can run on that. I do think it comes down to value exchange between participants in that equation, right, where there's value between access to data and collaboration. We invested on the venture side in a startup company called Flywheel.io that's trying to address some of the challenges that you highlight, that the interoperability, the sharing, the kind of uncertainty around sovereignty of data as it relates to surgeons or hospitals or patients ultimately. And how do you facilitate collaboration? What are the business models? You mentioned Mayo, they have wonderful collaborations with external companies that are helping kind of activate the value of their data. And I think we'll see more of these kind of federated learning platforms that are able to support the connectivity between different data sets to power applications, be it research, be it some of the tools that we described around training and other things. So I think it's in the early innings of how these various assets that different stakeholders are bringing to the table are going to unlock value. But I think it'll come in the collaboration with different participants.
Daniel, we talked a lot about the perioperative process, and a few of the other panelists hinted at that too. But for just what happens inside the OR, because we all understand that you have to have somebody prepped and prepared appropriately before they get there and then taken care of after the procedure, but everything that happens not only in vivo within a procedure, but ex vivo around the entire OR suite. You shared a lot of different insights about the data and the need for different capture in the entire suite. Share a little bit about what we spoke yesterday.
Sure. Yeah. So a couple of points, I guess, on a few things mentioned by other panel members. I actually started off, as most entrepreneurs in this venture, thinking, you know what, I'm going to create a data warehouse. That's what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to layer AI on top of that. And I'm going to go clinical by every procedure. And it was this grand vision. And of course, you need to start somewhere. So we started somewhere. And I spent a little bit of time with the provider networks. And an appropriately framed conversation around recording in an operating room with the appropriate set of folks will turn into, whoa, hold on a second. We own that data. And we're not going to let you own that data. In fact, we're going to forbid you from recording. Now, the physician might want to record, but if the physician has administration might have a different opinion about that, right? So those conversations turn into a really interesting dialogue about providence, a really interesting dialogue about where's it going to be housed, who's going to be allowed to use it, we own it, we might license it, but not to you, not to a third party. We're going to license it to somebody in industry, right? Any of the three on this panel and others, for a particular procedure-related access. So pick your robotic platform. A provider might license recordings associated with that platform to that particular vendor, but to a third party that aggregates everything, normalizes it, make it open source. Bad idea, not going to happen. That turned into a really interesting set of dialogues. That informed a little bit about what we're doing at my company. But the other thing that I learned very, very quickly is there's so many different platforms of capability that are getting created. And to your earlier your question just a moment ago, the reality is that from our perspective, and we actually frankly retooled how we think about this a bit, the digitization of a procedure means every procedure. So where do we fit in that world? We fit in that world where we provide the eyes and ears in a room with local edge-based high-powered computing and a secure, approved internet connection to a cloud. In other words, we're kind of like an app store for the capabilities that are out there being created by companies that are probably right here, right? And in that world, we believe that the right place for us to sit in that ecosystem is to be the input device, if you will, for the acquisition of material, meaning audio, video, intraprocedural imaging, scope views, operative field views, to bring in for that interrogation to a third-party resource of some type developed by, again, companies here and otherwise around the world. And then the output of that goes on to either the robotic surgery screens or on the screen in our operating room, because our console has a screen on it, to provide an output for that type of intelligence. But when you start creating asynchronous libraries, I've arrived at an opinion from the marketplace talking to us, from providers speaking to us, that a single repository is highly, highly, highly unlikely. Those relationships will be between the Cleveland Clinic and Intuitive, between MGH and Medtronic, around specific use cases, specific devices, specific applications, and those are likely to be value exchange relationships. And our place in this world, where I might have thought it was the entire thing, is really a facilitation of that whole dialogue. And my personal view of it is that expertise that is gathered from 5,000 robotic procedures on an Intuitive system is valuable to Intuitive users. On a Hugo is invaluable to Hugo users. For an open surgery knee replacement is valued to the maker of that device. And really my view of that universe, if you will, is that those relationships are commercially driven between provider and the developer of that device, and it is around optimizing the care of the patients treated in that facility. Now, we talked about anonymization. I think you can do that with artificial intelligence. You can do that with scrubbing, much like the license plates on Google Street View. You can't read them, right? Theoretically, you could do that same thing. In fact, we're doing some of that in our own labs right now, engineering labs. Then you can get into a conversation of making them available more broadly. But unless and until that's fully solved, it seems like a challenge.
So let's play off of what you're building and developing, and I want to go back down to Chris. Traditional device diagnostic manufacturers, they haven't historically been structured to develop software for data analytics, AI. How do you bridge that challenge? Is this license, partnering, co-develop, or let the others build that and acquire or integrate?
No, it's the right question. Medtronic is a software company, the degree to which we have historically written algorithms for hardware. We're not by any means a software company in the traditional technology sense of the word. So, when we buy a company like Digital Surgery, we're buying the capability for software encoding and stuff like that. Excuse me. The reality is, if we're going to get big, we're going to have to rely on third parties to, get bigger and better and to make ourselves more market-oriented. I don't think we're going to turn into Oracle overnight for that kind of capability set. We're counting on the ecosystem of data that's been described up here, I think, for us to be able to evolve our hardware into, usable data that improves the surgical experience for the surgeons and for the patients. And, the algorithm writing expertise that we've got, where you're kind of optimizing outcomes that's an ongoing valuable skill set that we want to preserve. And, and we're going to have to augment our engineering capabilities to include, enhanced software capability that we don't, we just, it's not who we've been.
Yeah.
So, I don't think any major strategic can go it alone. We've got to have a partnering attitude toward this. And, just one random thing. If you look out 10 years and say, what's really going to drive this market, the med students that are getting trained today are going to get trained in these kind of digital platforms. And the demand for increased reliance on these libraries of data and imaging and, benefiting from the tens of thousands procedural experiences that are stored, whether they're Medtronic or Intuitive or J&J or whatever, that's going to be a market demand, and it's going to come from our customers, 10 years into the future. And that's why I just figure this stuff's going to sort itself out. The demand from the ultimate customers of large strategics that can afford to build and implement robotic platforms is going to make us have to work this out amongst ourselves one way or the other. And we probably don't know how yet, but we'll figure it out.
Somebody going to argue, disagree? Thumbs up?
We're not arguing
You
on this
disagree
panel.
with that?
We all agree?
Well stated, well stated.
Yeah, very well stated.
So tell...
Oh, you want me to disagree now?
Well, I'm sure you will. That's nature. You have a tech center looking at a lot of digital solutions. Is this going to be something that you look to roll out for others, or is this to be integrated within your other commercial offerings?
Yeah, meaning to be transparent, the short answer of everyone on the panel, you're not integrated that, right? Because there are stakeholders and market and a lot of things. But I think, meaning obviously data is the fuel to everything, and we all speak about the holy grail of AI and identify the lesion and just press a button and go. We are far away from that. I think you can start with digitalizing, take a stapler, make it smart, take a grasper, make it smart, take a stent, make it smart and then feed it back to specific procedure, get that data from there, and then grow. Meaning, I think AI, I ran an AI company before that, and you speak with the AI folks, and first, most of them are very theoretical, right? And they speak AUC, that I had to Google what is AUC and go back to statistical course and understand what's AUC, and then 85%. That seems very low to us in healthcare, that you have 85% probability to be successful in your prediction. So how do you take those AI and use that to augment the skill set? Meaning we're not trying to replace the docs, let's make it obvious. But I think robotic, and I'm a big believer in robotic, obviously, to your point, has a low penetration. You can start taking a lot of manual procedure and digitalize them. And intra-procedure, all the surrounding of the procedure, you take that as a first step and find out where you create the most value and digitalize that aspect. And then you move to a more sophisticated one, whether it's soft tissue characterization, whether it's robotic, whether it's how do I look in the previous 5,000 cases, how do I connect to remote. But we have to start with something, and to me the biggest challenge of digitalization is how do you monetize and how do you commercial launch that? Because the hospitals are all in the red, especially after COVID. They hate introduce new stuff, and you have the startups that are trying but get pockets of information, but no one wants to pay. You have the strategic that we want to launch, but we care about our devices, so you have to marry them. So to your point, we actually did try to do the hybrid approach because we are a young company, so we have 2 innovation hubs. One digital surgery, like full startup, ping pong tables, all of that in Minneapolis. The other is vascular intervention in the Bay Area, and trying to combine that with staplers and devices and think about it. But in the end of the day, there's so many companies who all agree with that, and you have to connect them all. And the first to connect them all and spend the money and think 5 years ahead and not 1 year ahead will be ahead of the time, but it's a big bet. That's the problem. It's a big investment to retrain and kind of cannibalize your own business. And that's the biggest challenge right now.
You talked about the commercial models. Rachel, this is a great place for you to start talking about, is this going to be monetized? Is this going to be just an added service to offer to your customers that use your technologies? You're going to have to look at different commercial models. Are you looking at different commercial models? Who's going to pay for this? How do you demonstrate the value or what the price point for something like these solutions could be?
Yeah, price points are difficult, especially if you're looking to get something out of it, right? You're getting data out of it, trying to get value for your product out of it as well. So we're looking at a lot of different commercialization models, marrying it with our own current products, building on those, having packages of things. You then also have to start looking at service and how do you manage through the service aspects of that for your different software, because software historically, whether it's bugs and getting people understanding, okay, is this bugs, is this what? But yeah, commercial models in general are going to continue to be a moving target, especially as all of us continue to go to market and everyone has some really great creativity. And so one of us comes up with something and then the other one's like, oh, wait, that's a really good idea. And so there's a lot of different options out there, but monetizing it, something that's digital, is definitely going to be difficult and is already, I think, proving to see that.
Oliver, you've introduced a lot of different concepts and technologies here. Tell me, when we get to digital and the intuitive model, what does the commercial and the monetization of this look like?
Yeah, I think, just echo, it's a challenge, right, for the bigger medtech players to kind of navigate. Is this direct pricing or is this an opportunity to differentiate and to drive stickiness and, kind of commercial models for our core business? I get the luxury of spending my day meeting early stage companies and startups, and they have to hustle, you guys have to hustle to figure out how to create value to monetize that without the fallback of selling more, capital equipment and the like. And so I look to some of the exciting models that are being experimented in the startup space, across creating value, the subscription models, the ability to demonstrate longitudinal outcome improvement and tie healthcare economics to that, the reimbursement strategies in certain domains, even going straight to the payers, or even like care navigation, right? As you think about some of the outcome improvements that minimally invasive care, that many of the platforms and features and outcomes that the technologies represented here could unlock, could align with, right, in terms of the payer model. So I think it is in the early innings, but I think we're going to see a lot of innovation in that space. And I look to the early stage companies figuring out some of that, probably on behalf of the medtech companies, and then the medtech companies themselves creating value, being really disciplined to demonstrate that, prove it out, and find paths to monetizing it.
I have a lot of people very bullish on digital surgery, and of course we're going to find a lot of people that are skeptical, and typically I find that because of the enormity of the topic, where people just say this is a giant issue to tackle. We're going to get there, and I wouldn't have put this panel together if I didn't think we would be able to add supreme value. Tell us about the biggest challenges, though, that you're seeing, Chris, to be able to roll this out.
Yeah, look, I think short term, it's access, it's figuring out the data rights, how you make a scaled business model out of subscale data availability. I think the mid to long term, it's not a challenge. I think it'll be an exciting ride. This will turn into an actual real business. Medical devices really hasn't been, if you think about it. It's kind of like you set your price, it declines over time. It's dictated by, government set reimbursement that's copied by insurance companies. It's not really like a real business. No one's really competing all that hard. This is going to be the freaking Wild West, and I think it is a decade of massive business model innovation to look forward to. So I won't be around for it, but I'm going to wish all of you young people well.
Yeah, you will.
I'll be watching. I just won't be.
Chris is giving me the funny look because I think the only thing standing between him and St. Patrick's Day is this panel. So
no, I have one more panel.
I don't think that's standing between you and St. Patrick's. I'd like to thank each of the panelists. This has really been a joy to hear these different perspectives. I invite anybody here in the audience. They're very approachable unless they're running to another meeting, but I expect they'll be here throughout the rest of the few days we have left. 32 years in med tech, and I got to say, I've never seen an semblance of this volume in med tech investor conferences. So very, very happy for Scott and what he's been able to accomplish with he and his LSI staff. So a round of applause for LSI, and thank you for our panelists.